Hey folks, how's everyone doing? Yeah, you still with us? You still with us? So I know some of you are probably itching to ask questions, so I promise I'm gonna keep it quick. So before I begin, I wanna say thank you to the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations for allowing us and allowing me to be here, and I hope that the steps that I've taken before and the steps that I take on after are going to continue to honor and protect and pay respect to the land and acknowledge the land that I'm on. I don't know if there are any other Caesar staff here, but I just wanted to really put it out there for any students out there that are continuing education students, to go up to your Caesar executives and to really ask some tough questions. So when I was president of the Student Union, we also went through bargaining for a year, and the things that I'm hearing that are coming out of the Caesar executives, quite frankly, is worse than some things that we hear out of right-wing groups. I just don't understand. It's quite frustrating. It's quite discouraging, and I think that the Caesar executives are coward for dealing with their staff this way, and that the only way that the lockout will end is if continuing education students start holding their executives accountable. So the Continuing Education Students Association office is on the 3rd floor of the Student Center, right past the elevators. So I recommend that you go there anytime and make sure that you question your executives and ask why they're actually putting your access to services in jeopardy because of locking out their staff. So, well, this light does no justice to my skin. Dr. Crenshaw and Dr. Benjamin just took us to church. I mean, for real. I think that if you look at my notes here, it was like, you know, when you're in lectures and you're frantically writing because everything is just so amazing, and there are bubbles, there are arrows, things are in different fonts, and I'm gonna try to kind of to reference them as much as I can and reread them back. But I think that one of the things that we wanted to do as respondents was to talk about some of the key points raised by Dr. Crenshaw and put them in a context to here to Ryerson, put them in a context to our communities that we live in hopes that you're able to frame questions and discussion that localizes it. As a black student in Canada and as a black student at Ryerson, I think the discussions of race and the discussion of current relations and current ways that we are able to navigate these campuses is something that is very difficult to have, as it is with every other thing. But I think that one of the things that make it very difficult on campuses, particularly as a student, is that you are dealing, and I find that I'm dealing and I'm having conversations with people who are people who just tell themselves that they're smart, right? I'm just gonna be really simple. And we are on campuses where everyone is intelligent and everyone is an academic and everyone knows everything about everything. So when you start talking about your lived experience and when you start talking about how you feel as opposed to what you know, right? So it's oftentimes when a situation happens or often when you're dealing with a particular policy, it starts with how you feel. That's how I find. And there's an inability to articulate that. It becomes very difficult to have some of these conversations, and I think that even now till 2013, on our campus, we're having a very hard time having the discussion. I think we're better than most, but that's just to say where I think everyone else is at. I think that in the student side of the thing, we had to have a conversation around representation and race very, very, very recently. So for example, the Students' Union existed for 50 years. I think we're gonna have our 50th anniversary next year. And I was only the second black president of the Students' Union. The very first one was in 2009, my second year. The first racialized president was 2 years before that, in 2007. So I'm cognizant, and I always battle with acknowledging, you know, working within institutions and outside of institutions, and that a figurehead position actually says nothing about the community. But I'm also cognizant that that does reflect a particular ideology and a particular thought about what we think of our campus and what we think of students that are able to do and accomplish accomplish things beyond just going to class. I think that the post-Trayvon Martin has changed us all, and post-Trayvon Martin has us all thinking, and has us all struggling, particularly friends that I have that are my age, struggling with where to take these concepts of colorblindness and this post-racial myth and thought process, and how to actually talk about it from a visceral and a real and a personal place. Because for me and for many of my friends, these situations just reaffirm and confirm some of the things that we were feeling, right? They put to paper and made real feelings that we had that we were unable to articulate. And as I see a parallel between law and how it works in society, and also policies in our universities, because the policies that we've had to follow for the last 4 years, some of us 6, it was for lack of better words, the law of the land, right? These are the laws that dictate this space that are on. So as students, I think there are questions that we need to also still be posing about what does the law of our land, of Ryerson, say to us as racialized students? What is the law that allows certain books to be taught, that allows certain curriculums to be taught, that allows certain faculty to get promoted, certain faculty to get excluded? The law of this land, what does it actually tell us, and what does it do to confirm and reaffirm the feelings that we're having? I think that I have a story that I wanted to tell. So before I came here, I was in the studio, and I was, thinking, oh my gosh, what am I gonna say? I'm sitting next to Dr. Crenshaw, like, oh my God. So I went and I asked some students that I had, and I was like, okay, so like some students that were in the studio, and they were all racialized, and I was like, just tell me about your experience with racism. Like, let's start with that. That conversation was probably, well, first there was a lot of crickets, and second, it was actually a pretty hard conversation that I had, and it brought me back to a lot of conversations that we had when we were doing anti-racist organizing on this campus, particularly around the task force, around different campaigns, because what I fear is that this discourse of this post-racial world is not only, it's not that it has begun, it's that it's embedded. It's embedded in our bodies, and it's embedded in the Y generation, right? It is the reality that we live in, and although the students were talking about, well, like, I don't really face racism, we went into a 20-minute conversation of them giving examples of the everyday racism that they face even today, right? So it's the ability to define it and to be able to grab it and to say, yes, this is actually the reality that I'm facing. So then, some of the things that when I was a part of the students' union that we kept trying to ask and try to think of is, how do we then, because a lot of the things that I focus on is less talking about, well, I still think it's important to be fighting the problem, but more about how do we give agency and power and the tools for the people who are oftentimes the survivors of that violence to be able to say, right? So it's when we struggle with these conversations with ourselves, and when we struggle with these conversations with people that we assume will be right on our side, I think that that's actually indicative of where we are at with this post-racial discourse, and how often it is, I see it in myself, it is us racialized people who believe in it the most. Mm-hmm. And I think that I know that in my process of unlearning, I believed in it the most because I needed to believe in it to continue to move on. So my survival was tied to believing that the experiences that I'm having aren't really real. So when I would say my awakening of acknowledging that this situation is actually real and that my survival is barely any survival at all, my survival is everyday work, that I have to start questioning my reality, and I have to start questioning that, that thing that I just thought was nothing, or that policy that I looked at that was nothing, or that textbook that said this that was nothing, and start actually taking it as something. And I think that one of the points that you brought up, Dr. Crenshaw, of people just, of wanting, I know for me, because I speak a lot for my personal, of wanting me to be the nice black boy, right? Of wanting us to frame things in a way that's not complaining, and that's not questioning, and that's not pushing the boundaries. Well, too bad, right? Like, I think at the end of the day, like, if you're like that student that felt discriminated against because of equity policies, well, too bad, because at the end of the day, these are the everyday realities of many of us, and to some extent, your feelings, and I speak primarily for the student, because I think that situation that you brought up around the plaintiff is a situation that a lot of us can relate to, right? Like the students here, we can tell you about the experiences of hearing oh gosh, why do we have this policy? Why do we need to be talking about this? It's partially the need to start saying too bad, I guess, right? And start saying that we as students have to stop asking. We as students have to stop begging. We as students often, like you and your group of students did, have to stop, keep going to administration and keep going to be like, can you change this? Can you do this? If we have the power to actually change it and do it ourselves and force it upon the decision makers and the people that get to make those decisions. I think that one of the last things that I wanted to say was around, it feels full circle for me here to be here and to see this event that's co-hosted with Denise O'Neill Green, and to think of where we were at as a campus 4 years ago when the Anti-Racism Task Force was the hot topic to talk about. And if you're not familiar with the task force, it was a multi-year project that involved students, staff, and faculty that was really one of the first, and I would say the first of its kind, of institutions in Canada that actually looked comprehensively at what is this problem here, right? And it looked at it from the perspective of racialized students, staff, and faculty, and made recommendations. We all know what happens with reports, oftentimes, and recommendations, but I think that the important thing that the task force did was to make that conversation at the forefront and to make it not go away automatically, right? Because at the end of the day, there was a goal. There was a report that had to be done. There was recommendations, and the administration and community as a whole had to respond to that. So it's not just another instance that happened that we could forget in 2 or 3 months. So 4 years later, when we're still having some of these discussions and still thinking about how some of these things affect our Senate, our Board of Governors, our community, the ways that we engage in our campus, I think it's important to go back to some of those things. And I think that it's important to go back to some of those discussions to continue to push them forward, because they're not any new discussions. So as someone who's been here for 6 years, I can see the cycle of talking about some of these very things. And I hope that as students we're able to ask for and push for a little bit more, and when the answer is no, to actually take it upon ourselves to do it. So I think I'm gonna leave it at that. I wanted to focus mine a lot on students and us, the ways that we can take some of these very real things that are happening around us in this world, and some of these really empowering and inspirational and transformative work that's happening, and work to bring it in on this campus, and start putting it into practice in our everyday lives, with interactions in our classrooms, on campus, at events, but also with our policymakers and lawmakers of this land. Thank you.
So now, with having heard all of our speakers,